Good afternoon, lords, ladies, gentlemen, and fellow Nuffield scholars. I would like to start by thanking my generous and supportive sponsors, the Elizabeth Creek Foundation, as well as Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust, for the amazing opportunity to travel and study a topic I'm so incredibly passionate about, grazing healthy animals to produce healthy food while sustaining our family farm for future generations. I would also like to thank my long-suffering partner and now husband, Mark. First of all, I would like to share with you a quote. It's from African-American poet, human rights activist, actress and author Maya Angelou, and I believe it sums up a lot of what underpins my farming journey. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. I've got two people to thank for inspiring me to undertake a Nuffield in this subject, and I'm lucky enough to call them both friends. One is the renowned author and soil guru, Nicole Masters. Not that she would want you to call her that. In fact, she has rebranded Guru to G, You Are You. It was while reading her book, For the Love of Soil, that I had an aha moment, the first of many in this process. And the other is fellow 2017 Nuffield scholar Ben Taylor Davis, also known as Regen Ben, who encouraged me to apply. What I had been good at up until then was solving problems, but always on a reactive basis. But listening to Nicole's book, I realised that there could be a different way to approach these problems. In that book, Nicole describes her and her family's health problems due to pesticides and chemicals, and this made me think of my husband's late father, who passed away aged just 42 from leukemia, leaving him to run the farm with his mother at the age of just 15. At the time when doctors used to make home visits, the consultant pointed out the pesticide cans in the farmyard, picking up one and listing all the cancer-inducing carcinogens that were contained in it. I also know from my own experience with MS, which I've had for 20 years, that what we eat is so intrinsically linked to our health. It all starts with the soil, Ben Taylor Davis explained. So, Julie, we took some in-depth soil tests to try to see what was going on beneath the ground. As we farm mostly permanent pasture, there are limited options for changing cropping, so we wanted to start improving pastures using animals as a tool to repair soils and improve species diversity, which is where my title was born. Non-selective, ultra-high intensity livestock grazing, also defined as mob grazing, creates a disturbance event to promote soil health and kickstart biological change. It involves grazing a large concentration of livestock on a very small area for a short period of time, often using electric fencing to mimic the predator-prey behaviour similar to how animals grazed thousands of years ago on vast prairies, plains and steppes around the world. Each parcel of land might only be grazed 2 or 3 or even once a year, allowing for long rest and recovery periods. These long rest periods allow for root reserves to build and solar energy to be transferred through photosynthesis into the ground, in turn building carbon and energy reserves and improving overall soil health. High-intensity grazing forces animals to non-selectively graze, eating all species available rather than concentrating on the lusher, sugar-rich options, like me and cake. Anything left over is trampled and, alongside the organic matter being expelled by the grazed animals, this leads to increased nutrients and dry matter being incorporated back into the soil, improving soil aggregation, hydrology, as well as allowing soil fauna to flourish. A flerd, on the left there, on the right, sorry, is a hybrid word for grazing different species of animals together, such as sheep and cows, or even goats, chickens and pigs, and horses. Multi-species mob grazing works on the premise that each livestock species utilise different types of forage accordingly. Cattle, for example, cope well with longer grass grazing, while sheep prefer short. Goats, on the other hand, are browsers and like more shrubby species, often outside the field boundaries. However, running these species together as one herd creates challenges in terms of infrastructure and patience requirements. In this diagram from US-based Understanding Ag, you can see a simplified version of what grazing strategies are, ranging from set stocked on the left towards more adaptive multi-paddock or AMP grazing on the right. Since starting our mob grazing journey and from visiting those that have been practicing for many more years than us, I have discovered that perhaps the method that we have adopted on our farm is actually AMP grazing instead of mob grazing. We and many other farms I visited used this method to tailor grazing to different age classes of animal, depending on their nutritional requirements and the farm's wider selling strategy. It's all about being adaptive to what you see on the ground. It is interesting to note that set stocking isn't all bad in terms of animal performance, which is why it can be difficult to move away from it. Certainly, on our farm, we used it successfully for many years to finish animals solely off grass. It allows animals to selectively graze, which tends to mean they eat the most nutritious plants first, but this can mean some plant species can become overgrazed and less desirable plants become dominant. With AMP grazing, I believe that with planned management, it is possible to plan grazing to suit both livestock class and prioritise soil health by rotating fields that may have had more grazing one year with more rest the next. I travelled first to Kansas to attend a No-Till on the Plains conference, where I had the chance to get to grips with how grazing strategies were helping Midwestern farmers arrest soil damage and soil loss. I even managed to fit in a few Nuffield sheep and goat farm visits whilst getting married in Norway earlier this year. What I found on my travels was dramatically different dependent on region. Those in arid, brittle regions have a very different set of parameters to work in than we do in the more temperate, wetter areas. Having undertaken Savory Institute holistic management training, it's a bit of a mouthful, I really wanted to visit the birthplace of the system itself, Alan Savory's home country of Zimbabwe. We were incredibly fortunate to visit whilst Alan and his wife, Jodie Butterfield, were there, and we had a good chance to talk through the concepts face to face. Visiting the African Centre for Holistic Management gave us a fantastic opportunity to learn how livestock were being managed to regenerate desertified areas, and also how management like this can be so incredibly useful for kickstarting habitat recovery. Some of these cattle herds were being moved upwards of 8 times a day. This was on maize stovers, the stubble of maize, with herdsmen accompanying them during the day and then being contained either in a boma or wooded area at night with access to water. Following on from an incredibly busy and enjoyable tour of all sectors of ag in Zimbabwe, I don't know whether everyone knows that we went to Zimbabwe. It's a bit of a year group joke. I then went on to visit graziers in Zambia, and in particular renowned grazier and cattle breeder Johan Zeetzman. Here, I learnt just how important breeding animals that flourish in these conditions is, which I know fellow cohorts Rob Havard and Vic Ballantyne will be touching on in their presentations tomorrow. My Nuffield farm visits in the UK, Ireland and Holland included visits to some of the movers and shakers in the mob grazing world. One visit was to fellow Nuffield scholar Alex Brewster at Rotmel, who has been successfully mob grazing for several years. He is also improving hill ground considerably by concentrating numbers of cattle in areas using mob grazing, leading to the control of weeds like bracken and improving overall grazing and soil quality. What became clear was everyone had different opinions and ways of doing things that fitted with their wider context. Whether they could realistically move them once or even twice a day, how small an area to put animals on, what animals to run together, and so on. I learnt a lot from a course with Gabe Brown when I asked if he mob grazed his sheep with his cattle, or indeed just mob grazed them at all. And in fact, he just lets them run an area of land pretty much on a set stock basis. Realising I had a lot to learn about soil, I decided to go on a couple of courses with fellow farmers. And as part of this, I am now fortunate enough to be part of a Nicole Masters coaching course called CREATE, which stands for Consciously Regenerating Ecosystems in Ag Through Transformative Experiences. Another mouthful. I'd just like to share this from a soil test we recently took on the farm. We're incredibly lucky in this country with just how much we have in our soils as reserves. But we need to learn how to unlock this and make it available to our crops and animals. As you can see from the figures, the total in-soil reserves on the right-hand side are huge, whereas the crop available nutrients are deficit. And we need to be able to unlock the total in-soil reserves. It's a functional problem, not a case of there not being there in our soils. As a side note, the rest of this soil sample, we're very lucky to be permanent pasture, and we've got organic matter, about 13.3 in this particular field. But what struck me was my Nuffield journey has taught me so much from sharing ideas with fellow farmers from around the world, and during discussions with the many farmers I visited, this was what we all had in common: digging holes and looking at poo. From Scotland to Zambia, there are all manner of compost heaps, wormeries, biochar piles and microscopes on kitchen tables, with farmers trying all sorts of things. Many cited reduced vet and medicine bills from longer grass grazing, and that's something certainly we have noticed on our farm. Lambing outside has also made a huge difference in medicine usage for us. We've also reduced our already low fertiliser requirement dramatically, and this is also a trend on the farms I visited. Longer grazing seasons, increased carrying capacity, and housing being shortened, in some cases outwintered completely, massively saves in both fixed and variable costs. Many are using direct marketing opportunities under the grass-fed and pasture-raised labelling schemes. There is also increasing evidence that grass-raised meat has higher nutritional density, another strong marketing opportunity. Some are also layering enterprise that complement those existing on the farm, like rearing chickens, pigs, or adding things like agrotourism. And with SFI, there is the chance to stack payments. As with so many things in agriculture and indeed life, everything is contextual. What works for you on your farm perhaps won't work for others, and farmers are in a unique position to understand their own farms and what works for their situation. So many of the benefits to adapted grazing are nuanced and anecdotal, but it's still important to note them so you can record progress. This goes for soils too. If you don't know where you started, you can't see the progress you've made. Thanks to technology and like WhatsApp, the world has got a smaller place, with hundreds of farmers around the world talking and sharing ideas daily, if not hour by hour. I think this is a great diagram that sums up my Nuffield journey very neatly. When I travelled to my interview, I knew I didn't know everything, but equally, I had no idea of how much I didn't know. I would say I am currently flailing about between the valley of despair and the slope of enlightenment. A friend recently said to me, we need to find comfort in the power of not arriving and start to feel content with the journey. We live in a world of constant unknowns, and often life is a big feedback loop. We get caught up with reductionist science and silver bullets, but the true value is looking at our systems and being able to adapt and pivot, not treating every drawback as a crisis, but just as part of the game plan in a bid to be more resilient. I would like to end on a note of gratitude to those in my mycelium network. 2 years ago, I hadn't met these and many others, and now I am lucky enough to call them friends. Thank you very much.